Welcome to the channel. This is an overview video for the 5 points 1900 map for Workers and Resources Soviet Republic. Now this video is going to consist of three parts. In the first part, I'm just going to go very quickly over the motivation for making this map and what I was trying to accomplish. The second part, I'm just going to go through the backstory, which hopefully will drive the way the economy goes and to justify the central starting location. And then in the final section, I'm just going to go through over some of the key map features, try and explain why they are the way they are. And one thing I do want to emphasize is that I'm not going to be revealing any of the resource locations on the map in detail, simply, well, for two reasons. One, I think that would just spoil the whole focus of the way that this map is designed for. And secondly, I can't remember. But I actually finished this map about 2 months ago, and then I went on and did the version that's the second version, which is in the workshop, which is 5 points 1960. And to be honest, I can't remember exactly where all the key resources are. I know vaguely where they should be based on the storyline, but I can't remember the detail anyway. So so if you want me to show you where the resources are, sorry, you're gonna have to find them out for yourself. So why did I make this map? Well, there was a number of drivers for this. The first one was the fact that, as any of you who follow my channel, you know that I really like doing early starts, and one of my big ambitions is to start in 1900 and play all the way through to 2000 and build a really big economy. And that was the main reason why I started working on the map. And I knocked around a number of ideas. I mean, this map's been in generation for nearly 5 months. And I worked around key ideas, and then it struck me that the second thing that I would really want to do, and this became possible when the devs actually allowed editing of the borders, was the fact that I've always wanted to start in the center of a map, because if any of you play regularly, you know that the normal starting location is on the edge and then you build in, and what you tend to do is get a bit of ribbon development in the center. And what I really wanted to do was start in the center of the map and then have a reason to explode in all different directions. And this is the reason why I wanted a starting location in the center, so that instead of having all the built up areas on the edge, the built up areas would be in the center with small towns around the edges. And I think that having a central starting point was the logical way to do it. And then what happened was while I was working on that and thinking about it, the third reason started to kick in. That is that I wanted a map that would challenge logistics and give reasons for using other forms of transport besides road and rail. And this is the reason why we've got this kind of slightly isolated island with the river flows around it and these quite deep chasms, which I'll show you later on. And the idea is that that gives a reason to use ships for local delivery rather than just send them to export. And that also applies to aircraft, because every time I've used aircraft so far, it's just been used to either bring tourists in or to export certain goods to either the Soviet Republic or NATO. And I wanted a reason to actually use aircraft and helicopters to move goods around, possibly even expand the use of helicopter construction offices. So hence, this is why the map looks the way it is. It's got lots of different features, certain different construction points, because again, another thing I was trying to do is come up for reasons why you'd need to make a strategic decision rather than just following the map contours and getting out there. The real challenge to this map is not actually building a large economy with lots and lots of people. It's about managing the logistics systems, which I have to admit I'm a little bit nervous about now, simply because the waste management update has completely changed the nature of logistics. I think that release then lifts this map to a new level of difficulty, and that's the challenge that the map sets. So I think that's probably a good point to start for the justification and reasons for making the map. Now I want to talk a little bit about the backstory. Now the backstory is that the Central Committee had heard rumours about this very wealthy remote province where the resources were easy to pick up and there'd be a great source for the supporting the Soviet Republic. So you as a team leader have been sent out to establish a base camp where you could very easily start setting up the operations to bring all that wealth flowing back to the Central Committee. Unfortunately, once you got your initial camp set up, the surveyors went out and looked round, and they didn't find very much. If I just do a little bit of surveying, I'm not going to give anything away. If I do a little bit of surveying for coal, what you'll see is that if I move over this whole central area, you'll see that you've got some coal, you've also got some iron, and basically all the surveyors found in this flat central area was bog iron and poor quality coal, nothing else. And that meant that the mission was very much on the point of failure. And of course, there's consequences because the Central Committee doesn't accept failure. Luckily, while the surveyors were travelling further afield, they came across a very impoverished village tucked down in this area called New Hope. And what the villagers here told the surveyors is that the real wealth was actually hidden in the hills around the outside. And that was reported back to the Central Committee. So what the Central Committee did was change the level of the mission, and you are now charged to build a major community in the center, which can then send out and develop all these resources for the benefit of the Republic. So that's the backstory. It's kind of a glossed up version of why I actually built the map, but I feel it kind of fits everything together quite nicely, and it does give a focus again towards that logistics perspective. So I think what we're going to do now is just go around and talk about some of the key map features. As I've already shown in this area, you can prospect over here and with the fossil fuels and find some coal deposits. Now there's a kind of a practical reason for putting these low quality deposits in here. In fact, what I actually did was, if anyone's familiar, if you're familiar with the map creation editor, what happens is when you create a map, the game paints random resources right across everywhere. Sometimes I just normally remove them all, but this time I left the ones for the coal and iron because it gave this kind of sweep of deposits across the center of the map. And what I did was I originally removed all the concentrations from this central area. So there is very faint traces of coal here, and these faint traces are really here to support the 1900 start, because obviously with a 1900 start the development is very slow, and it'd be very difficult to kind of get out and kind of exploit the resources in the hills if you don't get a little bit of a leg up. So that's the reason why you've got this low grade coal and iron. Now if you're starting in 1960, whether you want to do spend time developing that is up to you. And of course, the one thing you've got to do is find it, and this is going to be a key element with whether you know whether the resources are or not, because the key thing is if you start in the center, you've got to get to those resources, exploit them, and then transport them. This is why even though I know roughly where some resources are, it's not going to help me that much on the map, because your first task has got to be developing an economy here that's self-sustaining. That means that you're probably looking at agriculture, importing and exporting. And of course the problem is that you've only got a medium customs shed here, which is a long way away from everybody else. And of course eventually this will get clogged up even if you are successful. Therefore this is the reason why you've got quite an extensive coastline here, because you're going to need to use ships. Now the next thing I want to do is just talk about this kind of strip out here, because you can see this is actually the border. So the gap between the two lines is outside the map, even though you're nearly in the center. If I come up to the back here, what you'll see is that there's a section here with NATO. What that means is that if you build ports along here, you can export to both the Soviet Republic and the NATO from this pathway. And you can see that all the shipping connections are on the right hand side of the map. So this could become a very profitable commercial area here. And therefore eventually this customs shed could become redundant once you've got all your port facilities set up and ready to go. Well, that's technically the long-term objective as well. And of course, to work towards the left-hand side of the map, you are moving into railway connections and other bits and pieces. That is the kind of way that the map is actually structured. As I say, there you will find the resources here. You can survey for them. You're not going to build a major industry with that. What you've really got to do is get out to the hills and build the major industries. Now, if I draw the map up, now I've drawn the map up to full size, because what you'll see is there's actually roads running across the map. Now these roads are a result of the rough terrain that was created, because what I used was water erosion a lot, and I didn't use the whole map water erosion. I actually used the option where you water eroded sections, and what that did is it gave these very deep valleys, and which effectively cut the center region off from where you could say that the profitable resources are. And you can see that they're very steep, and what I started out to begin with was just putting in these roads coming down the hills, simply because it was a bit of a pain getting these roads in using the full power of the map editor. I think if you were trying to use these tools here, it would have been virtually impossible, especially as the fact that when I generated the rock cover, a lot of these areas were completely covered in rock, and you can see that effectively the roads are running in thin bands through the rock. And one resource I will tell you that you will not have a problem with is gravel, because this rock formation is everywhere. So what that meant is that we've now got a series of deep gullies, and I'll just give you a quick tour of what they actually look like. What we got here is a road that comes down from here, and what we got I put in here is a kind of flooded valley where the water's spread out and crossed over. You can see little bits of road left over. Then you've got the massive pathway up here to get to the top and get out there. And then of course eventually the roads expanded to the various border crossings around the edge. And probably the most spectacular of the ones of these gully gorges is the fact that what you've got here is it goes up this side. I really like this kind of ridge line that was coming down. So there's a tunnel through here, and then it goes up to there. Now, so there's no reason why you need to use these roads, but I'll give one very gentle hint, is the fact that it might be worth exploring some of these areas, especially once you start to unwrap some of the resources on the map, because there is advantage, but of course you don't need to use the roads. You could literally use shipping, move your goods around. As you can see from the point here that you've got effectively a dock area here, got a little dock area here, which is just here. It's got a bit of a tricky road to get down from, but there's but as they say, that where there's a way there's always a will. There's also this one here, so you've got these kind of possible areas where you could build a dock to move goods around, even up here, because I've actually play tested this, although it's not very practical. You've got this here, and what you can do is cut through here and make a channel through these very low-lying marshlands here to be able to effectively allow goods to be shipped down this coastline. And if you don't want to use trains, in fact, you could connect it up to this point here and actually create a channel all the way through. In fact, one little bit of play testing I did is I made this completely into an island, made this into an island, and then just had the mainland cut across here. It's really a strategic decision that you want to make to know how you think the most efficient way things can go. So we've got these very deep gullies. Generally, the other reason for these roads is that even up in these areas here, the terrain is pretty rough. You can see here, and you can see another example of why gravel is not a problem. So developing these areas is going to be quite a challenge, but at the same time you will see that the kind of lighter green here are plateau areas, so there is scope to be able to build industries up here. It's just that it's going to take a bit of effort and get time to get some connections. There's also a possibility in gameplay that once you've got this area built up, you could build in from the borders, and that's probably a good segue into the, I think there's 4 Soviet connections and 2 NATO connections, land connections, that will start in the bottom left hand corner. Now there's no reason whatsoever you can't use these as a starting location if you want to. This one is fairly interesting because you can see it's got a fairly restricted kind of starting area. That means that very early in the game you're going to have to possibly be a bridge across to here to escape. But really it's just here to provide a land connection, bit of interest, and that's about all I can say about it. Now this one in the bottom left, you can see this one is a little bit more interesting because Originally, it was meant to be an optional starting position. In fact, it still is, really, if you want to go for it. I mean, it would be a pretty hard start. And the idea is you've got a small custom shed here, but close to a major NATO connection here. And the idea is, and this is of course got rail connections as well. And the general idea is that this will give you early access to NATO vehicles. And what you can do then is kind of work in conjunction with NATO, buy and sell goods to NATO. And then the NATO connection, especially if you can develop the rail connection, will kind of strengthen things up a bit. But the alternative is that if you start in the center, this is going to have the potential for a major export route to NATO, from the fact that, again, just to give you a very, very broad idea, that there's some quite wealthy deposits in this area. I think they're iron and coal, but I can't remember, to be honest. But of course there is an intrinsic chance here. But in the case of the fact that you do want to develop this, I've put these rivers in. You can also see on the map that there's these black dots which represent these artificial lakes. Now, if you've never encountered them before, these have been put in to cover the sewage discharge option here, but you see this one will say that it needs to be placed near water, and this doesn't count as water. But of course, at the same time, with the new updates, you can't build these a long way away from somewhere, because they still need to be maintained. The solution is, if you come into here and look at sewage discharge, and you've got a mod here which is the same as the base game. The difference is it's not subject to water restrictions, so you can place it anywhere. But what this means is it gives you the option to just drop that in there, and then you've got a fairly realistic way of disposing the sewage into the river there. It also means that if you want to build in some other places where maybe you don't want to use this lake here, you could possibly just let all the sewage run down the side of the cliff here into the river down there. So it's just, so these are the reasons for these lakes. What I will say is the lakes themselves don't indicate presence of a major resource. They're more in strategic positions based on distance from possible disposal points. So like you've got this lake here would be your only realistic position for dumping sewage up on this plateau here, unless of course you dump down the side of the mountain here, which may have a consequence if you want to build a town down in there. And the same up here. There's a fairly big lake here. What I will say, one hint I will give you, there is some fairly good deposits in this whole plateau area. This is an area that you certainly need to think about of developing in the long term, because there is some real wealth up here. But of course, as you can see, it's not exactly well located. Now, and to emphasize that, if we come up to here, in the center here is a NATO connection. It's a medium connection. Again, it was originally placed to provide an option to run from the center down here across the river and to come up through this fairly rough terrain so that you could export to NATO. So that's really the reason of its existence. And of course it gives you just another reason to run logistics across the map. The one up here is, I'm not even sure why I bothered to put this in, but I thought it was probably a good idea. I think it had something to do with the fact that I wanted a location so the map could be called 5 points, because of course the roads lead down from these to the center. So I think that's the reason why this was put in. From a starting perspective, all I'm going to say, guys, is I wish you luck. If you really want a really hard challenge, this is probably the one to start on. You can see it's a small customs office. The terrain is absolutely really rough, and of course what you've got is this kind of area around here where you've only got one road out, and it's up this very steep slope here. I mean, as I say, there are resources here, but it's going to take a lot of work to get out and actually find those resources and then exploit them. And of course you've only got the small customs shed to actually deliver it across the border. But there's all sorts of logistic problems around here. Now the final connection is in this corner here. Now probably this one is not quite so bad. Again, it's really here to provide logistic support to the center. You can see it's a large custom shed. It's a Soviet custom shed. And then of course, because this terrain is relatively flat, and of course you can level it, the idea is that you can run rail and road links into here, into the main center of the map relatively quickly, relatively cheap to build. And of course, what you could have in here is your farming community. But you can see there are the odd small lakes here showing how low lying this ground actually is. And of course, what we got here is a massive swamp. It started from the original terrain editor and I just kept expanding it because I liked it. The fringing is a little bit annoying. It's actually caused by the fact that the ground is virtually exactly level with the water. It's less than a meter, so you get this fringing. Close in it looks pretty good, but as you zoom out, what you'll see is it starts to kind of shimmer a little bit. But I left it in because I really liked it. Plus, I think it just looks interesting as a boggy area, and I can't remember if there's a lot of any bog iron in this area. But of course, one problem you're going to have is that if you try and build anything here, it's going to tell you that you're building on water. Even areas that look like water aren't water. So that's the challenge of that area. I put this dormant volcano here simply because the map felt a little bit flat on this side. So I put this in just to give a little bit of hype, a little bit of interest on this side. We've got another little bay here, which is a bit of a bog area. And I think there is a key resource in this area, one of the more advanced ones. It's either, I don't think it's, I can't remember if it's oil or uranium or bauxite, to be honest. But I think vaguely that there is a key resource in here. Of course, the problem is this is in a very isolated part of the map, so you can't start here. And I think this is the key to this map, that the good resources are in awkward positions. The good starting location doesn't have much in the way of resources. So it comes back to that theme of developing your economy, possibly using agriculture and using import goods to ship them back out again, because that was very much the theme for an early start, and then actually pushing out and developing the various areas. And I think I've covered most of the map now. I can't think of any other features that would come in here. So I think this is a good point to wind up. As I say, the recommended starting location is in the center. There is no power on the map, so if you're gonna play this map, you've got to develop power from the get-go. And of course, in the center here, there's no coal mine, handy coal mine to drive it. So you're gonna probably need to use mods. Again, it goes back to the fact that starting in 1900, there would have been no national grid. The real challenge is modes of transport and logistics, especially with the maintenance update, because you're going to have to deliver key or small amounts of resources across the map. So that is the challenge rather than building a massive economy. The terrain is rough, which means you're going to have to think very carefully about your road structure. That is about it, guys. So I think this is where I'm going to leave it. Hope you found this overview interesting. Any comments, opinions, suggestions, feel free to chuck it into the description and we'll have a chat about it. But until next time, whatever you do, enjoy your gaming.